Okay. They're off to the races. All right. Welcome, everybody. We'll just give it a couple of minutes to let people filter in. We had quite a few coming in today, and we'll get started. All right. I think we have a couple more kind of coming in as we'll go, but we'll kick it off. I just want to say welcome to everyone to joining our joint webinar with Boardex and Altra Company. Today, we'll be covering the topic of how top consulting firms engage high-performing alumni. I'm very excited to bring you insights from two of our global consulting clients, Bain Company and Accenture, as well as discuss the Consulting Alumni Rankings report from 2023. My name is Jen Peedy. I am the Vice President of Customer Advocacy for PeoplePath. I'm based in the sunny San Diego, California, and I've been with PeoplePath for about more than 3 years at this point, working with our clients to improve strategy, best practices, create opportunities for programs through events, research, webinars like this. Prior to PeoplePath, I was a client living in New York City and managing another global alumni program in a consulting space at Oliver Wyman. My background is in online community building, most famously with Oprah Winfrey, and am also an adjunct professor at Syracuse University teaching social media for journalists. We have over 200 people signed up for this webinar, so I'd like to just take a moment to introduce you to PeoplePath and Boardex. PeoplePath is a world-leading corporate alumni software provider, and we work with almost all of the biggest consulting firms to power their alumni programs, as well as incredible law firms, technology companies, retail, healthcare, nonprofits, and more. We have over 60 employees worldwide with a strong presence in North America and in Europe, and our software is extremely customizable, powerful, scalable, updated all of the time, which you'll hear more about throughout this discussion. And if you'd like to get in touch with us following this webinar, please just get in touch through this link that I'll be putting in the chat. And you can get an email directly as well. We believe that lifelong relationships are the foundation for mutual success. So we'd love to partner with you if you have any corporate alumni needs. And we also should be keeping an eye out for our 10th annual benchmarking report that will be coming out in June. And if you want to meet in person, we will be gathering people in London in June and in October in New York. And so if you want to sign up or hear about more, I'll put the link in the chat as well. So please do sign up and join us for any of those events. We also have 3 incredible panelists with us today. So I want to introduce Maya Imberg, who's the Head of Thought Leadership and Analytics at Altrata. We have Angie Sfeir, who's the Global Outplacement and Alumni Program Manager at Accenture. And we have Erin Wickens Sussman, who's the Senior Manager in the Alumni Network team at Bain Company. I'll pass it over to Maya, who can tell you a little bit more about her role with Altrata, and then pass it to Angie and Erin, who will then also give some introductions to themselves. So Maya, please let us know.
Thanks, Jen, and really happy to be here, and thanks everyone for joining. So as Jen introduced me, I head up Altrata's thought leadership team and analytics practice. So what that essentially means is that I get the fantastic job of looking and delving into our data and coming up with some really useful and unique insights that can help our clients and can also add to the kind of debate in the public sphere around corporate executives, around leadership, around corporate governance, and a range of kind of additional topics that our data can highlight. In terms of today's session, we're going to be looking at our Boardex Consulting Alumni Rankings report. Boardex is one of 5 brands that comprise Altrata, and Altrata really is a data powerhouse focused on people intelligence. And what that really means is that we have a huge variety of sectors that use our Altrata brands for all sorts of purposes. And today we're going to be talking about how data can really help alumni programs across the consulting sector and other sectors as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Maya. Angie, do you want to take it next?
Yes, thank you, Jen. Very happy and excited to be here with all of you. I'm Angie. As Jen said, I'm the program manager for Alumni and Outplacement. I'm currently based in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm a rehire at Accenture myself. I was with Accenture from 2011 to 2019, part of the reporting team, then the compensations team. And I rejoined last year, over a year ago, as an HR partner. And this year, I moved to this role, working with Dani Martinez, who's our global alumni lead. And as I said, very happy to be with all of you.
Great. Thank you. And Erin?
Hi, thank you. I'm Erin Wickens Sussman. I'm at Bain Company. I lead our communications and engagement strategy for our 25,000 alums globally. I've been at Bain for 18 years and with the alumni program specifically for roughly the last 10. Prior to Alumni, I was supporting client-facing graphics, but have been really excited to be working with the alumni team and driving strategy there. Based out of Boston. Amazing. I can't remember if I said that.
I always forget the location. That's why I made sure to say it first. People don't usually like to hear that I'm in San Diego, so I'll try to take note of that. But thank you, everybody, for being with us today, and we can just kind of jump right in. So I'll ask a few questions of the panelists, and if anyone has any questions throughout, please feel free to throw them into the chat, but we will also make sure we have time at the end if we just miss anything accidentally. So do feel free to ask as it happens. So let's kick it off with Maya. So last year you wrote and released the Consulting Alumni Rankings Report that shows that consulting alumni make up a significant proportion of senior leadership in businesses around the world, with 17% of Global 500 board and leadership team members having previous consulting experiences. So in this report, what would you say are some of the biggest or most surprising findings?
Sure, thanks, Jen. I think that's a great way to kick things off. So what we did last year is that we looked at over 200 consulting companies globally, and really looked at identifying all their alumni and where they are currently employed. And so when you talk about the 17%, what that means is that 17% of all board and C-suite members currently at Global 500 companies. What that means is that 1 in 5 of all of these individuals have at least one consulting experience. And so actually what we found among these particular, high performing leaders is that they stayed on average for around 8 to 9 years at their consulting company. And of course, that includes, many partners, managing directors, you name it. So many have gone on to become, very kind of leading figures at their consulting company, and then left to go into kind of other kind of corporate roles. But I think, you thinking about the 17%, what does that really mean? I think it really shows the kind of high performance of the consulting sector in terms of creating leaders with really strong skill sets for the commercial world. Because if you think about the Global 500 in terms of the companies that are part of this list, it's only around 2% that are actually consulting companies out of these 500 companies. So to get to 17%, in terms of the leadership having some kind of consulting experience, I think it really showcases the value of experience in the consulting sector, but also the strong alumni network and the strong network that you have coming out of a consulting career, and kind of going into other areas of the corporate world, and that kind of network that you can take along that clearly, you can see pays dividends in terms of you end up with many people at really kind of the top helm of lots of companies around the world. So I think that's kind of one major finding. I think another one is really around thinking, well, what value do these high performing individuals bring to a consulting company? And I think certainly the first part of that is around engaging with these engaging with these individuals, and clearly the kind of direct networks that you get. So they may hire, the consulting company to do work for them in their new kind of places of employment, certainly. But I think they offer more than that. So they offer the connections to or just a really wide range of other influential individuals. And so we had a look, in our data around, looking at the connections that these individuals have. And we found that at those, Fortune 1000 companies, so those on the board or those in leadership positions at Fortune 1000 companies, they had an average of around 75 direct connections with other such leaders at these types of companies. And so, what does a direct connection really mean? It's a strong connection. So it's someone that you may have worked with previously. It's someone that you may have had done an M&A transaction with. It's someone that you may have been had a board role with at the same time, whether at a commercial company or at a non-for-profit, or it's someone you have a contact with. So 75 very strong connections with other leaders who have really senior kind of business decision-making power. Those are very kind of strong connections that a consulting company can leverage. So it's not just about the person who's in that high role, but it's also about the connections and the network that they can provide to their previous employer as well. So I think those kind of two findings are the ones that kind of struck us and really kind of are showcased in our data as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. So are there any other facts or areas that you want people to kind of zero in on if they haven't read the report yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many interesting findings, and I certainly encourage everyone to have a read of it. But I think perhaps not a surprising finding, but certainly one that is food for thought, I think, is thinking about looking at gender diversity in this respect. So we had a look at, all the people who are currently in these leadership positions in the Global 500. And we looked at whether they were consulting alumni or whether they were non-consulting alumni. And then what we found was that among consulting alumni, there's a higher share of women within that particular kind of cohort. Of course, women still comprise, the minority of such positions, but 37% were among the kind of the consulting batch compared to a lower kind of 25%. And I think that's, again, that, you can think about and debate the reasons for that, but I think there's a couple of things, again, coming through, and that's the skill sets that a consulting career can kind of leave an individual with. But also, again, perhaps women are using the power of those connections and the power of the networks that those consulting companies are able to provide with. So I think, that's another part of the report that I think deserves kind of further investigation.
Yeah, I like that you split it up into the consulting and non-consulting. I know that's a question amongst firms a lot, is should we only be looking at consulting? But there is a good argument to be made with 25% of non-consulting women out in the firm, out in the world too. So kind of makes a good case that all of your alumni can lead to something important. That's
Absolutely.
great. Wonderful. Well, thank you. So let's get a little bit more of a perspective from our two consultancies here. So Erin, let's start with you. Both Bain and Accenture are mentioned quite a bit in Maya's report. Tell us a little bit about your program at Bain Company.
Sure. So we're a loyalty business, and our people are our most important asset. I think something that we really focus on at Bain is that we are working to build lifelong relationships with our employees, and that our alumni are just a natural extension of the employee life cycle and are really core to our human capital and talent strategy. So when we think about our approach to our alumni program, we're really looking to invest at scale. We've got 25,000 alums across the globe, and we use tools like Beyond Bain, which is our platform powered by PeoplePath, to help support us do that at scale. But then we also like to focus on those personal relationships as well. So as Maya was saying, the importance of networking, the importance of building relationships with people. So while we're global in nature, we try to engage locally as much as possible through, local events and things like that. Because if you think about it, I think there's a lot of affinity people naturally have to place and space. So while we have global efforts in place, we also try to encourage the local offices to reach out, host events. And then we also like to encourage personal connections as well through something we call a guardian, which I can talk more about later. But really someone that can kind of champion that relationship with the alum and nurture that one-to-one connection with the alum. And then I'll say too about our program, we really focus on innovation. So we survey our alums regularly and ask questions like, how are we doing? How are our services? What's going well? What can we improve upon? And we're constantly churning and trying to think of new ways to do things and support our alums and provide the resources that are most valuable to them. And we're really able to do that because we have sponsorship at the most senior level of the firm. Our worldwide managing director understands the value of alumni, and again, that they're core to our talent strategy. So all in all, that I think that's a good little sum up of our approach.
That's amazing. So many things I would love to dig into, and we will. But one of the things in the report that it really caught my eye was it says that Bain's high-performing alumni at Fortune 100 companies each have about an average of more than 100 direct connections to other Fortune 1000 board and leadership team members. So congratulations, because I think that's such a huge, tight achievement of a network, right? Like, it's incredible. But how do you engage such an impressive group of high-performing alumni?
Sure. So when I mentioned earlier that we're all about building lifelong relationships. So there's a real sense of community at Bain that exists within, whether that's amongst employees or with the alumni. So it's actually not surprising to me to hear that stat that our alums value those connections and value networking in the way that this report kind of brought to life. So when we talk about those direct connections that our alums have with those business leaders, I think a lot of it is likely happens naturally, right? Because and independently, because they've worked on those relationships so long while they were either at Bain or post Bain. But in terms of things that we do to help foster those kinds of connections, we do host C-suite roundtables, which includes alumni and non-alumni. So that's a way that folks can kind of rub elbows. And then we also, for our most senior and tenured alums, we do invite them to become members of what we call the Bain Advisor Network. So that is a way in which that we can bring, again, both alums and non-alums in to help support our client work. And so we have a bench of talent there that they're able to meet.
Very cool. Yeah, it's a very important group, and I'm sure there's lots of creativity going on there too, which helps. That's great. Let's hear about Angie. So Angie, your Accenture also appears in the report quite a bit. It's coming in at 8th for alumni in the Fortune 1000, so that's quite impressive. Tell us a little bit about your program and more.
Sure. From Accenture, we were the second corporate alumni program in the world over 30 years ago, right after Microsoft. Our vision is always to be for an Accenture leaver to be a lifelong brand ambassador of Accenture. We truly believe that when success is shared, it always grows. We have over 300,000 registered alumni spanning in 89 countries. So we are truly a global program. Of course, we have our local teams supporting us. Because we do host, and I can talk about this later, we do host global events and we do host global webinars, but of course we encourage our local teams to connect locally with the alumni. They know their alumni better than us for sure. And in terms of team, as I said, we have Danny, who's our global alumni lead. I'm there, and we also have an amazing team in Buenos Aires in the side of operations. We have around 6 people who support us in all of our initiatives like webinars, events, and so much more that we do. Yeah, of course you cannot get off mute. I can keep talking. I can keep talking about our webinars for sure. We have a monthly series of webinars. Each year we have a different mantra. this year for us was around career development, so we can grow our people into those leadership roles as alumni. Next year, we're going to be focusing on mental health and well-being. We're also looking into launching a virtual volunteering event that I'm very, Accenture is very passionate, and I'm also very passionate on corporate citizenship. So I'm always looking for ways to integrate both alumni and corporate citizenship activities. And what else can I tell you about Accenture? So much more. Well, generative AI, right? Last year we hold a webinar on that called Change the Way You Work with Generative AI. It was hosted by Noel Russell, who leads our global AI solutions and is responsible for generative AI at Accenture. So we also try to provide those tools to our alumni, not only focusing on career development, but also on latest trends. And of course, we at Accenture, we are adopting AI and generative AI.
Thank you. I finally got off mute.
So happy to have you back, Jen.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Yeah, so no, this was great. Thank you for expanding more on Accenture. But yeah, so one of the things in the report that we can kind of jump back into our scheduled agenda here was that Accenture is one of the top 4 for producing CTOs and CIOs. So very clearly demonstrating that the firm gives a lot of technological know-how. Do you focus on this in your content strategy at all?
For sure. I can share an example from our India local alumni team who hosted an SAP webinar. They had a panel of SAP practitioners. Some of them were rehires. And we focused on also a rehiring strategy for our alumni, looking for ways to engage with them and joining back Accenture. And also to have these people who are actually rehires share their experience and also the way forward for our SAP function.
Very cool. Wonderful. So, Erin, do you have anything to add about content at Bain, how that maybe technology?
Yeah, sure. So we also share a lot of technology type webinars. We actually have one coming up on generative AI and data analysis. And often anytime that we have a new product and a kind of homegrown product that we've launched internally at Bain, we'll often invite our alums to kind of have a sneak peek demo, behind the scenes look at the products and the technology that we're building. So definitely top of mind, especially as a company that is a partner with OpenAI. We definitely are focusing there and trying to get the word out with our alums.
Very cool. Yeah, that seems to be a very popular thing these days, the AI topic, which we'll jump into a little bit in a bit. But Maya, I also wanted to ask a little bit more about Altrata. So you have so much data, and how do you manage that and using it in everyday space?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a great question, but it's also a great problem to have, right? So at Altrata we have 5 different products, and so we have each product has a certain kind of special use cases, but what we're doing and the future of Altrata is that we're going to be bringing these databases together. We already have kind of one product now in the market that brings our professional intelligence solutions together, but that's really kind of the focus of our company, to bring just an increasingly broader kind of focus to really look at each individual holistically. But in terms of how alumni programs can really use this data, it can be a hugely powerful kind of tool that alumni programs can use. So it can, lots of clients use Boardex to track alumni, to get alerts on when they join a new organization, to get an alert on when they become a high performing leader, when they fulfill a new role, a new board position. These types of really up-to-date data can be hugely powerful, but also the connections of these people, and again, highlighting that network can really kind of give a huge boost to the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually something we've kind of been focusing in on ourselves. So our clients have heard a little bit about this, but we're launching something we call Profile Sync, which will also help fill in some of the data that may be missing or just hasn't been updated a while on our profiles and our platform as well. So this is something we're exploring because it's just so important to have so much information. And I think something like Boardex and PeoplePath could actually complement each other quite well. But I just think having information is probably the hardest part of our job. It's why we engage so much. So we're making sure our information is up to date. And so that technology piece is becoming huge in our platforms and our programs and our content. So thank you all for sharing that piece. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. A couple just direct to me, but feel free to throw them in the chat if that works. One question was, Accenture and Bain both have so many alums, hundreds of thousands. How do you accurately measure the success of the program? And how do you track referrals and boomerangs and things like that is the first question. I don't know if
Sure, I can jump in. Yeah, I can jump in here. So we actually survey our alums regularly and ask them, how are the services that we're providing? How likely are you to recommend Bain as a firm to hire or a place to work? And we're able to track that data longitudinally. So we'll then be able to say, okay, we've made these changes. Is it making an impact? Is this improving the overall support that our alums feel that they're receiving from our community? What else was in that question? I want to make sure I hit every point.
Just how do you track the referrals and boomerangs, and how do you measure
referrals
success?
and boomerangs? Yeah, so we actually have a whole other arm of our team that's basically focused on talent and tracking those referrals. We have a team called the Bain Career Advisory. They'll meet with folks and kind of track the alums who are interested in returning to Bain. We have multiple teams actually that are focused on those talent networks. I think a lot of it is just those personal connections that folks have and being able to call someone back at Bain and say, hey, I'm interested in a role, things like that.
Cool. Angie, how about you?
Yeah, we also track rehires, of course, and referrals is one of our sourcing strategies, of course. And as I mentioned, we truly believe that alums are a great way, our ambassadors, brand ambassadors, and we, of course, have them help us with having people joining Accenture. And in terms of a survey, we also have a survey that goes out every other year. We need to launch a new one shortly. Getting data, I mean, Accenture data is part of our DNA. Jen, you know that. We're very into data. That's how we actually present the program internally, right, to our business leaders and show with numbers and with actual results what we're doing. So we're definitely tracking that rehiring portion to show how the program is doing.
Perfect. Our second question here, and this is, I think, is just for you, Erin. How do you select your guardians and your champions that have relationships with you?
Great question. So we actually ask people as they're leaving the firm to nominate the guardian themselves. So oftentimes that will be a mentor or someone they worked with closely while they were at Bain. Although oftentimes there is a natural kind of life cycle to those guardians as well. So sometimes those guardians might leave Bain and we need to then kind of almost adopt a new guardian for an alum. And often what we'll look at is like who was on a case team with this particular alum, or who was maybe a career advisor or professional development advisor to this particular person. And if we can't find a personal connection, we'll then look at maybe industry-based, who's a leader in the industry that the alum is working in, and can we facilitate an introduction there?
Great. Very cool. Yeah, we did something similar. We piloted it in different offices and it worked quite well. We called it the Golden Handshake, I think is what ours was called. So I always love the fun names people come up with for theirs, but they're all important. So one question here, do you find it difficult to navigate EU data privacy laws, in particular in reference to alumni data? Anybody? I think we're all pretty GDPR compliant.
Exactly.
Yeah, before you even start one of these programs, you have to go through the privacy and the consent and all those things. So
Exactly.
most at this point now with GDPR being, oh God, 8 years old, give or take. So I think law firms, legal teams have gotten pretty good at navigating what is and isn't in the GDPR. So we haven't heard too many issues yet.
No,
Always
I'm
possible.
definitely partnering with local teams on that, from a global and local perspective, right? I think that's important, especially at global companies, because globally we sometimes lose track of what's happening in the local
Mhm,
teams.
mhm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great. Okay, well, we'll go on to the questions, we have here. So I kind of do want to dive back into just some of the things that came out of the report. So more than 16% of high-performing alumni have previously worked at a consulting firm. How do you both manage having alumni at competing firms? Do you allow them into events? Do they do anything special? It's always a conversation piece we hear from consulting firms of what are other people doing? So we'd love to hear you, maybe Erin, if you want to start with that one.
Sure. So we consider alums at competitors still alums and part of our program, but we don't include them actively in our programming. And the reason for this is, as I mentioned earlier, we're really about building mutually beneficial relationships. And the kind of support that we're providing to our alums includes access to deep knowledge and insights that we want to share with those folks. And we don't really feel like we can do that if the alum is actively working at a competitor. So again, we're just trying to really build that two-way relationship. What we do allow is we have those alums at competitors have access to their profile on Beyond Bain. So that way, if they do ever leave the competitor, they can go in and update their profile, let us know, and then they'll again be actively included in our programming. So events, newsletters, and things like that.
Cool. Angie?
We have no restrictions. Actually, most of our top employers for alums are competitors. We welcome everyone to join events or our webinars, even networking within the platform. There's really no restriction on our end.
Yeah, everyone's got a different approach, and every approach is perfect for you, right? And so it's up to anyone listening who's maybe debating this and if they want to include or not include. But when I was at Oliver Wyman, we did the same thing. We opened it up to everybody, and basically we viewed that these things are public events anyway, right? So the large portion of our alumni were at current competitors, and so taking that into consideration, you wouldn't say anything to the outside alumni world that you wouldn't say to a journalist, right? So those are things that we looked at, but definitely strategic value in thinking about it differently and segmenting, also very important to different goals. So that's great. What are some of the ways that you use data to inform your program strategy overall? So we've kind of talked about using data, and it's important, but how do you kind of dig into that and make it part of your long-term strategy? Maybe we'll start with Maya here with some of these Boardex insights.
Sorry, Jen, I think I just lost that last part actually.
No, just some of the ways that you use the data to inform strategy. So how could someone maybe use Boardex insights to help with their strategy overall?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes down again to, the strategic kind of way that consulting firms build their alumni programs. But essentially, I think there's a few kind of main kind of ways in which, it's to build that. I think, the first bit is really around having updated data. You want to make sure that you know exactly what's going on with that alum at all times. I think for rehiring is increasingly, a part of the alumni program and increasingly important. And so, Boardex for each kind of leader that we profile, we have their career history, the roles, the previous roles, current roles, some of their kind of corporate action experience, special skills. So, that kind of looking for talent, it can be very useful if you're looking to hire a specific kind of role or specific department within your alumni base. You can use Boardex to kind of get a better view of all your alumni who are in high level positions, and then absolutely taking advantage of all the connections that your alumni have, so you can see where they who they might know that is in a great kind of role for BD purposes, but you can also have a look at, they didn't just come from, the US part of the US Accenture kind of office. They may have come from, Europe or Latin America in terms of Accenture. So again, it's, you want to leverage all the kind of information you have within, within your alumni program, but also within, a tool like Boardex. But again, I think where Boardex can really help is if it goes directly into your own kind of alumni program tools. So we often work with clients that, where our data goes directly into their CRM. So it's just part and parcel of the way in which they work. And again, that just, that ease of transactions and ease of, just not having kind of additional kind of work for yourself. I think that also makes it, additionally more powerful at the end of the day.
Sure. Great. So to both Angie and Erin, so how do you use data to inform your strategy? So maybe we'll start with Angie.
Sure. We have several dashboards tracking data from our alumni. We track, well, as Maya mentioned, business development, how much sales revenue is coming from our alumni, the percentage of rehire, of women rehire. Also, if we go deep into whether we're sending newsletters, I mean, how many people are actually opening those newsletters, how many people are registering to our events and actually then showing up. We really see that month over month. So we, as I said, we love data. So in order to support the program, share it with our business leaders, and also to share it with the local teams, right, to see their efforts on rehiring and how they're doing, we definitely track as much as we can. We're always looking for even more ways to track interactions between alumnus, for example, in the network, and how they're doing that. So we're always looking to more data, actually.
Never enough.
Never, not at Accenture.
Yeah, data is king. Data is king for sure. I'll piggyback off of that and say yes, all of that, and add that we also use data to customize our outreach and content to our alumni. So, what's going to be most relevant for them? Is this the right IP for this person? Are these the right job postings that this person would be interested in? And then we also track things like the alums' preferences. Would you like to join an affinity group, for example? We have Women at Bain as one example of an affinity group that we host on our platform where alums can then join, and we track that information of whether or not they're members of such groups. We also track interests in our opportunities to rejoin Bain, whether that's as a full-time employee or a member of our advisory boards. And as I mentioned earlier, we also, of course, survey our alums, and we track that data longitudinally so we can then see, how is our firm to hire score and our place to work score trending over time. And I'll just share one little tidbit from that I found interesting that maybe others on this call would find interesting as well. Is we found in our surveys that if an alum feels connected to the firm, they're exponentially more likely to recommend the firm as a firm to hire. So really kind of drives home the point of data and being able to then go to your leadership team and say like, hey, look how important these connections are. It really impacts how likely an alum is to recommend us to a friend or colleague or for them to hire us themselves.
Love hearing that, especially for, so we have our benchmarking report coming up in June, right? So we ask questions about this all the time, but we had done a report in 2018 that really asked about the motivations of alumni. Why do they do this? So I love when I hear companies of any industry, shape, size, whatever, talk about the value to themselves, of course, but the value to alumni as well. This was actually a question we just got in the chat, which is in terms of a value to alumni, what are some of the things that alumni say that makes them connected to Bain or Accenture, which I think is something you just kind of touched on. Do they say anything else? Do they kind of talk about things they love, they hate? Like what else do you kind of find in these surveys?
We found that we asked, like, what does that mean? What does that mean to feel connected? And a lot of times it goes back to, do they still feel connected to the people at Bain? So do they still have that nurturing relationship? Again, going back to that value of the network. So ensuring that folks are invited to events, things like that. What else did they mention? Yeah, that they're up to date on Bain's latest news. It's a lot of times all going back to the people and the place.
Yeah, that makes
sure.
total sense.
Yeah,
Cool.
for us, it's networking opportunities. They really value that. I think that was the top response we got. And also hearing about job opportunities and rejoin Accenture. So that always is good for us to hear that people do actually want to come back to Accenture, as I did. So that's always good to know.
Yeah, we have a couple of survey templates. If anyone here is interested in seeing those, I'm happy to share. Essentially, we always ask basically a couple of the same questions, which is, are you likely to refer business? Are you likely to refer working for the company? And are you likely to maybe come back yourself? So the variations of those questions over time will show you, change and hopefully you see that getting better over time and starting from a good place as well. But it really does, that employee experience really does impact your alumni experience. And so
Right.
the better employer branding, I suppose, the better the alumni. That's great. So engaging these senior members, let's go back to the high performing topic for a second. So are they different? Are you engaging them any differently than you would be in maybe any other segment of the alumni? So maybe younger alumni, entry level alumni, things like that. So are there any differences between that, or are they just kind of, mostly the same? So thoughts on that, maybe Angie?
Sure. We do target specifically for rehiring our younger alumni. I know that some local teams like the US or Market Unit ANZ have some mentoring programs in place. So we definitely try to get as targeted as possible to our communications. But we're still in ways to see how we can use that data going forward. I think there is a lot to be done on that area from our end, that more than what we're already doing, of course.
Sure. Erin, how about you?
Yeah, I'd say our younger and more junior alums, we really have to think about engaging them more at scale. Just there's thousands of them. And we use technology like Beyond Bain to really help us do that. Whether that's kind of automated notes that go out over time, kind of thinking about what the alum needs and the moments that matter, things like that. But I'd say as an alum becomes more senior, that relationship really needs to become more relational. So that's where that role of the guardian comes in. And the guardian is always important, but they become even more important as the person becomes more senior. So a couple of things that we try to then do to kind of support proactively those internal guardians is we might reach out to them and say like, hey, have you been in touch with your contact X in the last couple of months? Because we really want those senior alums in our priority segments to hear from their guardians at least a couple of times a year. And so having that high touch connection both between us and the guardians and then the guardians with the alums is really important to the success of that more relational relationship. And I'd say in addition to that, we also customize IP in our newsletters for our senior folks. So, if we know that we have an alum in a C-suite level role, we'll make sure that there's at least one piece of content in our newsletter that will be custom for them, that will be tailored to that group. And then, of course, I mentioned earlier C-suite level events that we host as well.
Love that. Yeah, it makes sense, right? So the one thing I always like to talk about, and I've had a few conversations recently about this, is that eventually your middle managers will become senior, right? So if you can target them almost the same way, if not more, because you don't want them to get to senior and then all of a sudden, because they've got the title, here you come knocking, they're like, where were you the last 10 years? So it's really important to think about each segment similarly, or the amount, right, that everybody gets kind of the same effort, but to target them all throughout. The second they leave, if they're 21, all the way up to retirees, right? So you don't want someone to be like, oh, you came out of the woodwork. No, like I've been here kind of fostering that the whole journey, right? So that makes sense. We talked about women earlier in the intro, and Maya gave a great kind of overview of women in consulting and leadership. But I wanted to see what kinds of programs or content or events are you doing for women in leadership with your alumni? Maybe Accenture, Angie.
Sure. Yeah, we're definitely, especially during the month of March, we're targeting some specific webinar for our panel of women there. And also, particularly in India, we did this newsletter showing the women in leadership within Accenture, and also targeting at, of course, rehires and sharing their experiences outside of Accenture and after rejoining. Accenture in particular has a lot of great benefits for women, so we truly value that segment, and we also track that metric on a, I want to say, monthly basis. Right now we're almost at 50% of rehire for women. 47, but I want to say 50. We're getting there. So it's definitely a segment that we're paying attention, and we're also very, again, passionate about engaging with them during their time outside of Accenture, and of course welcoming them back.
Very cool. Erin, how about you?
Yeah, similar things on our end. We have a Women at Bain affinity group that often brings opportunities for our female alumna to come and speak throughout the year or to network throughout the year. Again, a lot of these are local chapters. So, Atlanta, for example, might host a Women at Bain event, invite alums to come and network with each other. We also have themed newsletters that we send out around International Women's Day, and themed spotlights. So those are interviews that we host monthly between the head of our alumni program, Jen Andrasco, typically, sometimes we have different hosts, and then an alum of interest. So we often theme those, have an alumna come and speak. We invite employees, we invite alums to come and listen in live and ask questions.
Very cool. I love all of the things you all are doing. It's so exciting and well-rounded, and just seems like you're kind of hitting all the high notes, which is great. Let's kind of jump back into some questions we've gotten in the chat here. So
Sure.
Let's see, where did we leave off? Okay, so do we let the alum know that they won't be receiving info now that they are a competitor, or if they've just stopped receiving? So going back to the competitors. Erin,
Yes, we do. Yes, so we let them know that because they're employed at a competitor, they will have access to their profile, and we ask them, if this situation changes, please go into the profile and then update your employment history. And then I don't believe we let them know when they come back in, when they leave the firm, they just automatically start receiving the information again.
Yeah, because they probably switched back to employees, so they get the
Exactly. Yep.
Great. If there are any other questions, please do make sure to drop them in the chat. We have, about 10 minutes left. So just do make sure to get your questions in. Keep going down here. Yes, there will be recordings sent out in the slides and any other information that we've talked about here. Let's see. How do you balance the one-to-one marketing versus brand-wide net marketing? So kind of company-wide versus maybe more individualized. How do you guys manage? Don't know if there's anything.
So we do, we have in our, so for example, we have in our newsletters, we try to customize those as much as possible by looking at fields that we store, like industry, seniority, things like that. And then we use what's called dynamic content to try to then tailor that content specific for that person's interests, seniority, et cetera. And then I think because we have that role of the guardian, that makes us a little bit different in terms of how we, I wouldn't necessarily call it marketing when we're talking about that guardianship relationship, but I'd say that that's really how we differentiate ourselves on that one-to-one relationship.
Very cool. Angie, how about you?
Yeah, definitely similar to what Bain is doing. All of our communications can be targeted at a local level, let's say country specific, or even skill specific. We're actually we're looking into how we can look into targeting skills specific communications, especially for rehiring, and also what interests every segment, let's say. But we do that in several ways that we connect with our alumni through newsletters or even events. As I mentioned, the SAP event, looking into that.
Yeah, I would add here too that typically we see, this is from the benchmarking report, about 36% or so of people are doing a monthly or a quarterly newsletter. And so up to you on which cadence you want to do. We typically see quarterly more often these days, less is more kind of thing. But within that, how you break up the sections, it should be more alumni focused, putting all those human interest stories up top and catching the eye, those people connection pieces that we've been talking about with the direct connection to human stories, right? The things that people want to know. And then the firm-wide usually takes a second seat, which is not at all what a firm wants to hear, but it is basically the way that you want to make sure you're kind of psychologically and sociologically getting to the alumni that they are the important ones, that they are getting this exclusive content. So the more you can kind of create that feeling and that connectivity, the better. And they'll always read the firm stuff, but maybe later. So you want to take I always say maybe a 10% of whatever's on the main website into your platform. That's high level, interesting, kind of covers each topic, but the website is there. They can go there if they want the bigger things, but just to give a taste into that and more about the connection in the community and the network. So
yeah, even do spotlights on previous employees, that usually helps with engagement a lot.
Oh yeah, those are things, and that's probably universally true across any program, which is very hard to say. But yeah, human interest for sure. Let's see. There's a lot of interest in the survey templates. So here's what I will do. I will put my email address here in the chat. So if anyone wants the survey template, just send me a note and I'm happy to send you. I have a couple of different versions so we can kind of go from there. But other than the surveys, let's see, we have, okay, can you speak to the affinity groups? How did you determine the segmentations? So yeah, go ahead.
So I think I was speaking to our affinity groups earlier. We actually have those groups at Bain. So when you're an employee, you can join these groups. And so this is just a natural extension of that. We created groups on our platform for those individual affinity groups that then alums can opt into proactively. And we will market them within our newsletters. We'll say, hey, did you know that you can join your affinity group on Beyond Bain and click here and they can navigate through. We also have other groups such as founders. So those are easy to find. We'll figure out who are the founders within our alumni network and we'll target them with a mailing and say, hey, did you know that we have this founders group? Would you like to join? Click here.
Cool. Right. Yeah, I think that's a natural extension. The employee resource groups, business resource groups, whatever you end up calling them, always different names, but there's always like a women at or veterans at or things like that. So definitely applying those groups. Another question. Oh, sorry, Angie, did you want to jump in on that?
No, we have the country groups in the platform. That's very us, I think. And we also have some groups on LinkedIn and in the platform, we also have for retired Accenture leaders. So we also have these, but from more of a local perspective, right?
Yeah, and you actually bring up a good point. We found last year that about 35% of programs are now focusing on their retirees. So it's becoming more of an interesting affinity group too, which may not be thought of originally.
Right.
Yeah. Another question here. So when do you include alumni and employee webinars, or do you keep them separate?
It depends. Sometimes we include them, sometimes we don't. I think for us, if it's an alum that's speaking in the webinar, we absolutely would love to invite alums to join the employees and vice versa. I think it just depends on what the conversation is about, how much of it is going to be about maybe a client story that maybe we don't want external people on.
Yeah.
Right. In our case, current employees, of course, have access to our network, so they're more than welcome to join our global webinars, depending on the topic. As I said, this year is more on career development, but next year that we're going to focus on mental health and well-being. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of our current employees also joining that.
Yeah, basically anytime there was an affinity group event, we used to invite people to those. If there were client events where alumni were clients, they would get invited. So it's really more strategic, but they would get invited to a good portion. I think we did 60 events a year when I left. And so maybe, I don't know, 10% of those were firm-wide events and the rest were kind of alumni unique all around the world. But yeah, it's definitely good to think of each one kind of separately, not just a blanket approach to employees.
Right.
How big are your teams and that directly support your alumni programs? It's a popular question.
Yeah, as I mentioned, we have a team of around 6 people in operations in Argentina, helping us getting all those initiatives out. From a global perspective, it's Dani and myself with Erin and some other leaders. And then local teams are depending on the size of the country, and also depending on some of them sit in marketing, some of them sit in HR. So depending on where they sit, that's how big they are.
Cool. Erin?
And our global alumni team is currently 9 people, I believe, and we focus on different areas. So we have one group that's focused on operations. My team focused on communications and engagement. We have another team focused on knowledge and events. And then we do have folks that we consider as part of the support, but they're not actually part of the alumni team. They'll similarly either be in the marketing role or they'll be in a talent or HR role, and they'll help us execute those events on the local level.
Yeah, we call them alumni friends and family, like the
Oh, there you go.
extended alumni team.
I like that. How many events do you do in a year?
Globally, we host monthly webinars, and then locally, it's up to the local team based on availability, budget. But yeah, especially now after the pandemic, a lot has. Well, Accenture has always been very virtual, but I think they're hosting more events now that we have this possibility of having virtual events.
My answer is basically the exact same. we host global webinars monthly, sometimes more than monthly, depending on, we've been doing a founder group events. So I mentioned earlier that we have a group for founders. We'll actually host a virtual networking event for them. I think that's roughly quarterly right now, but that will be in addition to our monthly global events. And then there's local teams who, again, up to them if they have the budget, if they have the availability to host something locally. And yeah, I think we're still ramping up after COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing post-COVID that we found was there just happens to be more of a mix of in-person and virtual events, which you'd expect. Really leveraging both to their biggest possibilities, I think, is really the biggest thing. Cool. So then we talked about, we talked about the cadence of newsletters. How do we track the alumni relationship at clients that helped open the door or win an engagement? So going back to business development, how do you both track?
We do track that, for sales revenue coming through our alumni. We have a special tool dedicated to that. So it's definitely one of the metrics we want to keep a close watch on and report to our leadership, right? Another way of showing how the program is developing and how it's helping Accenture grow.
Yep, very similar on our end as well. And in addition to that, we also are asking, we've just recently created a little signature on the bottom of our global alumni inbox that when we reply to internal emails, we ask, do you have an alumni success story you'd like to share with us? So sometimes it's just word of mouth. We don't always get it reported back through the official channels, because I think actually there's like an option for alumni as like the source or a friend. And again, because we're all about networking and building relationships, sometimes those two terms get confused. So we have to kind of dig in a little bit further and be like, where was this an alum or not an alum that was your friend?
Right.
But it's something we're actively working on and trying to improve all the time.
Awesome. With a minute to go, I think we've reached almost all of the questions, which is great. There's one request in the chat here. So if anyone's interested in discussing your alumni program, whether it's the panelists or the attendees, the Caterpillar is in the early stages of developing their alumni community, and Monica has put her email address in the chat. So if anyone's wanting to help someone get started, we've all been there. So would love to flag that for her. But I think the last question I'm going to end on is really for Maya. So Maya, you've created such a great report. Obviously, lots of questions have come from it and some really good discussion here. Are you focused on any other reports coming up in the future? Any other focuses for you?
Absolutely. So the team is always busy looking at what else we can kind of, delve into and kind of shed light on. We recently published a report on CFOs in the US. So we were looking at their business priorities, but also kind of their own kind of personal, well, not personal, but professional backgrounds. And then we're going to be doing the same for the UK. And then, you know, on an annual basis, we always look at gender diversity among senior leadership. So we'll be doing another report on gender diversity globally over the summer. So yeah, look forward to that. And yeah, just, you know, if anyone is interested in having a look at some other research and some other insights, you know, we'd love to kind of have you have a look at altrata.com. You can find all our research on the Insights tab, actually. So, and always, you know, feel free to reach out directly to me as well.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for joining, for giving such great answers. And we had a lot of good questions. So I was really happy with everything that we had here today. And I really do appreciate your time, both in the prep and in just here taking all the questions. So I think we had a great discussion. I'm going to put the links back here into the chat. If anyone is interested in getting in touch with PeoplePath, seeing a demo, signing up for our events, any of that, or just being in the list to get our benchmarking report, which will come out in about a month or so. But thank you, everyone. Please have a great rest of your day. And thank you. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Bye.